Hey everyone, welcome in. This is episode 3 of the brand new College Hoop News podcast. I'm your host, Tony Patelis from College Hoop News. Tonight we'll be focusing in on the ACC, do a little ACC preview. We'll be doing team-by-team breakdowns. We'll share our thoughts on the league, coach of the year picks, player of the year picks, etc. I'm joined tonight by a special guest host who I'll bring in right now, Kevin Sweeney from cbbcentral.com. Really interesting site with plenty of great content. Kevin does a great job covering all things college hoops, but he definitely focuses in on mid-majors. So definitely, if you have any mid-major questions, hit him up on Twitter at cbbcentral. Kevin, how are you tonight, man?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Also, you'll see Kevin quite a bit on the podcast this season. He's most likely going to be one of our main guests, so definitely get used to him being on the podcast this year. So, Kevin, let's get started. I wanted to kind of focus in on last year real quick and ask your take on the conference as a whole because, you know, they had 11 teams win 19-plus games. I think they had 9 NCAA bids, which was excellent. But then we got into March, and I think only one team, you know, granted that was UNC, who won it all. How surprised were you that happened? Do you think that was maybe was the league a touch overrated, or do you think it was more just of a matchups things in the NCAA tournament?
Well, I think it was a bit of a matchup thing, obviously. Like South Carolina Duke was a really funky one being in Greenville. But I would say the one thing I'd point to is, and it's kind of true this year as well, the ACC didn't really have a bunch of elite teams. North Carolina was elite, obviously. They won the national title. But there was a bunch of teams that were kind of, you know, like that I would say like 15 to 25 range level teams. And when you get to those matchups in the NCAA tournament, one game things against really high level teams, then you see those teams kind of bounce. And so I think that's where the ACC was, and I think that's where the ACC still is this year, is that they don't really have a ton of elite teams, but a bunch of really, really good ones.
Yeah, so looking at this year's group, do you think it's better, worse, maybe the same as last year? To me, there's a few more question marks. You know, Duke, for example, super talented, really young. Louisville, obviously going through their situation. UNC has some new pieces. Obviously, they have to replace their front court. What's your thoughts on this year's league as a whole?
I would say it's a little weaker, tentatively, a little bit weaker than it was last season, just because as you said, there are a few more questions. I don't think there's one team that I look at and I'm like, wow, that is a complete roster. The team I liked the most, probably as far as like a complete roster goes, was Louisville. And now I have no idea what they're going to do. Like I like Duke, but they have very little depth. We'll get into them a lot, I'm sure, a little bit later. But there's just not a team out there that I look at and I say, that is a team that I would want to put money on to go win a national title.
Definitely. I actually agree with you there. I think it's definitely, like I said, a lot of question marks, but definitely the talent's there. Just see if they can put it together. All right, we're going to get into the team-by-team breakdowns right now. We're going to go in alphabetical order tonight, just like we did this past weekend. So we'll start with Boston College. So we're going into year 4 under Jim Christian. We really haven't seen any improvement, unfortunately. It just seems like he hasn't been able to recruit at an ACC level, in my opinion. You know, going into a positive for this year was the addition of Deontay Hawkins. Kind of gives them a third option behind Robinson and Bowman. Just seems thin after those three, though. Do you see anything changing this season with Boston College?
You know, I really want to like them. I really love that trio of Kai Bowman, Jerome Robinson, Deontay Hawkins. But as you said, Tony, they're just not recruiting at an ACC level. I'm going to read something off here. The 4 newcomers, the 4 freshmen they have this year, all of them were 2-star recruits. 2 of them had no other offers. One of them had one other offer, and that was from Bryant. And one of them had a host of mid-major offers and then Wichita State. Like, that's not going to win you games in the ACC. They have a ton of dead weight on their roster. Like, they have some super high-level talent at the top. But unless they get, like, 3 more guys to be good rotation players for them, they're going to stay bottom 3 in this conference this year. And Jim Christian's probably not going to have a job at some point.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, he just hasn't got it done there. Not the easiest place to recruit, obviously, but you know, he just hasn't got it done on a recruiting level. One guy I wanted to ask you about, Nick Popovich. Do you see maybe him having a bigger role this year?
I think he pretty much has to. I mean, Deontay Hawkins is kind of like a combo forward, play the 3, the 4, but he's not going to be a 5-man. Popovich is probably the only guy who is going to be that center for them. So I think he's going to have to play. I think if he can give him like a 10-5 type year and give him like some solid defense, that would be a really nice step. for Boston College. Touching on your point on recruiting, sure, it isn't the easiest place to recruit, but Northwestern's recruiting well. I'm Homer a little here, but Northwestern's recruiting well. Stanford's recruiting well. Harvard's recruiting well. Like this high academic excuse thing, it's getting old because other high academic schools are recruiting fine and actually outstanding.
Yeah, that's a very good point. They are doing a great job. So real quick before we move on, basically, if it's not going to go well this year, we're both pretty confident. Is this the last year we see Jim Christian at BC?
My gut says it's not the last season. I think he probably survives because I think they'll be competitive enough in a lot of games where they're like, oh, well, if Kai Bowman and Jerome Robinson, stick around, we'll be good and we might compete. But I don't see this thing ending well. I don't see an NCAA tournament bid on the horizon, but I don't see this as the last year.
What do you think a good goal for them this year would be then? Maybe 13, 14 wins. Do you think they could get to that?
Not having their out-of-conference schedule in front of me, but remembering it being pretty weak, I'd say like that 14, 15-win plateau would be a good number for them. I mean, I guess I wouldn't rule out them winning, say, 5 ACC games. If you had some home games, like Kai Bowman's going to win you games. Jerome Robinson's going to win you games. They're really freaking good. So, yeah, I'd say like 13th or 12th place in the ACC. I mean, I'd love to say that they're going to like blossom and have a bunch of like young guys break out around Robinson and Bowman and Hawkins, but I just don't necessarily see those guys like present on the roster right now.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. Okay, let's move on here. We're going to talk about Clemson next. So just to start off, Chef Bubble cooked Clemson about 5 times last season. He just could not get rid of this damn team. So they're just the ultimate bubble team, and they certainly were last year. Their RPI kept them around for a long time. So looking at this year's roster, they lose 2 key guys from last year, Jaron Blossomgame, who was an all-ACC talent, really good player. Avery Holmes is a really good guard for them. A lot of pressure on Brad Brownell this season. He might be on the hot seat as well. He's missed the NCAA tournament now, going on 5 years, I think. So this might be a make or break year for him. I think they actually have some solid pieces. I really do. I don't think they're going to be an NCAA tournament team or anything like that, but I think they'll be competitive. I think they might be a little bit better than people think. What's your thoughts on the Tigers this year?
I feel like they're just like the beacon of mediocrity. They have so many guys on this team who I'm like, gee, that's a nice third scorer. But they don't really have any like elite player. They don't have a guy who I would say like, I really need this guy on my basketball team. Like Jaron Blossomgame was that guy last year, and they don't have that. I mean, like Marquise Reed is pretty good. I like Marquise Reed. I think their front court might be a little better now that they add Mark Donnell from Michigan. I think he'll be like a solid rotation player for them. But overall, I just don't see Clemson being a team that, makes an NCAA tournament team run. And I think Brad Brownell probably needs to go. I don't think he's getting the job done. I know there was kind of talk, oh, well, maybe he can keep Zion Williamson in state. I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't think most recruiting people think that's going to happen. And so I don't necessarily like Brad Brownell's chances to have a job at the end of the year. But, I mean, they're kind of in that 8 through 13 mix. I think most people are pretty confident that Boston College and Pitt are the bottom 2, but I think they're in that kind of mix where, hey, maybe a couple of things break right for them on on their home court, and maybe they make a move.
Yeah, they had opportunities last year. They just couldn't finish games. They could have certainly been in the NCAA tournament if they finished a few games, if they just couldn't finish down the stretch. One guy I wanted to ask you about that I really like is Elijah Thomas, transfer from Texas A&M, who played only 16 minutes a game last year, but he was really productive. He averaged 7 and 4. Do you see maybe him having a breakout season for them?
Yeah, I really like Elijah Thomas, kind of like a versatile combo forward type. Can kind of do everything. He was really efficient last year in those limited minutes. I think with Blossomgame gone, he kind of steps into a much like more elevated role, kind of similar to Blossomgame's role, in that kind of play inside and out, to do a little bit of everything. That's the one thing I do like overall about this Clemson roster is they have a lot of versatile like wing pieces that they could do some things defensively with. They've got some guards who can shoot it like Marquise Reed. But I think if they're gonna make a move, I think they need like 15 and 7 from Elijah Thomas. Like 14.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they have some really good backcourt depth, though. Shelton Mitchell, Reed. They bring in Clyde Trapp, Anthony Oliver, two solid recruits. So I would probably put them in that 9 to 12 range, maybe in the ACC if I'm picking right now. So definitely a big year for Clemson. Brad Burnell definitely could be on the hot seat. So we'll move on here. So we're going to talk about Duke next. They're really coming off a disappointing season, pretty much. I mean, I think they were number one in a lot of polls heading into last year. Tremendous recruiting class. It really just didn't live up to the expectations. I mean, Jason Tatum obviously played well, but Harry Giles just couldn't get healthy, just couldn't get on track. Marcus Bolden as well. Looking at this year's group, the talent is obviously there, but, kind of like with Kentucky this year, there's not much experience. Matt Jones is gone. Emil Jefferson's gone. Luke Kennard. Grayson Allen, he's going to be looked at for a leadership role. What's your take on Duke, and do you think Grayson Allen can be that guy for them?
I love all the individual pieces at Duke. Like, I really like Trayvon Duval. I really like Grayson Allen. I don't love how they all fit together. I don't know that Grayson Allen's the leader. I don't think Grayson Allen's the guy who's going to be like, let me not take as many shots and distribute and be the sixth man and make sure we keep everything together. I think he's going to want to score, and I think Gary Trent is going to try to score, and Trayvon Duval is a shoot first point guard, and Marvin Bagley didn't come to Duke to score 8 and 4. And Wendell Carter's really solid, but is he going to want to be a fifth option? Like, I don't know necessarily how these things piece together. I mean, they're going to win a lot of games because they're really talented, but I don't necessarily know that they're like a number one team in the country. I think right now that's not where I would have them.
Yeah, I mean, the talent is definitely elite, so they're probably going to be in that top 5 in a lot of people's polls. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know we've talked about a little of this on Twitter in this offseason. Point guard play is a big factor for them. Obviously, if anything happens to Duval, who do they go to, in your opinion?
I think it's really scary, but I think Grayson Allen's probably their backup point guard right now. They have Jordan Goldwire, who's a 2.5-star freshman who was about to commit to Eastern Kentucky, and then Duke swooped in, wanted like a 4-year guy. I don't think he's ready to be the starting point guard at an ACC team. Alex O'Connell's kind of like a 6'5" long shooter from Georgia. I don't necessarily see him as a point guard, so they probably give it Grayson Allen. And boy, does that scare me if I'm Duke. And what happens when Duval's not in the game? Like, there was 8 minutes. Let's say he plays 32 minutes. Like, is Grayson Allen the point guard for 8 minutes of a game? I'm not sure I love that if I'm a Duke fan. I mean, maybe Grayson Allen does put it all together and be like a really good player, both on the court and as a leader. But I'm just not. I kind of on a wait and see mode there, and I don't want to commit to saying, oh well, Grayson Allen will just take over and be a point guard, because that's so easy to do.
Definitely, I agree, and I think that I'm very intrigued by what they'll do. Like you said, when Duval's not on the court, or hopefully he doesn't get injured, but who knows what happens if an injury happens or something like that. I want to know if you could give me a little bit of background on Wendell Carter. He seems like a 5-star recruit who hasn't got much attention because of Bagley and Duval. Do you think he could be maybe one of the best big men in the ACC out of the gate?
Yeah, I definitely think he could. First of all, Wendell Carter's a really, really, really smart kid. He actually was between like Harvard and Duke. Like, those were the two schools that were like considered the leaders for his recruitment. I think he'll be really good in the pick and roll, which they can do a lot with Allen or Duval in the pick and roll. He can kind of dive to the rim. He'll rebound. I really actually do like the pairing of Bagley and Carter, because it allows them to both kind of do what they do best. Bagley can kind of protect the rim defensively and be super athletic, and then offensively, Carter can play the pick and roll, and Bagley can kind of do his thing, whether it's in some ISO looks or get him the ball in the mid post. So I really like Wendell Carter. I think he's a nice piece for them. We'll see how all of those come together. But he's a really, really, really good recruit, and he's definitely being overlooked because of Duval, because of Marvin Bagley.
Before we move on, I wanted to ask you real quick, what do you see this team on the defensive end? Because last year, they weren't very good. I think they were 118th in the country in scoring defense. They gave up. Do you think they'll be a better defensive team this year or no?
I think like I think Marvin Bagley's going to help them defensively because he's going to protect the rim. But I don't necessarily think they get a huge boost defensively by any of their newcomers other than Bagley. So yeah, I don't see a huge improvement. I could almost see them. They're going to want to run. I think they're going to want to run and try to get guys out in transition because Marvin Bagley's so athletic, because Gary Trent will be such a good driver. But if they weren't going to run, I'd almost say like they could do what the 2015 team did and just play a little zone. I think I actually think that would be pretty successful, but I don't think that really meshes with trying to run, which I think they'll try to do a little bit.
Okay, that's great. All right, so let's move on here. Florida State is the next team we're going to talk about tonight. Honestly, I thought Florida State was one of the more surprise teams last season. I don't think anybody expected them to finish second in the conference. They won 26 games, made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Not sure a lot of people saw that coming. Hamilton, who sometimes, Leonard Hamilton obviously sometimes gets a bad rap. I thought he did a really good job with last year's team. Obviously, he had a lot of talent, but this year's group looks a lot different. Obviously, they lose Jonathan Isaac, Dwayne Bacon, Xavier Rathan-Mays. So it'll be vital, I think, that newcomers like MJ Walker and company, make impacts. They have a really, really good recruiting class as usual. I think they're going to be a really deep team again. What's your thoughts on Florida State?
They're a really tough team for me to place because, as you said, Leonard Hamilton's kind of we never really know what we're going to get. As you said, they have the 12th best recruiting class in the country. Like if you told most people, oh, they have the 12th best recruiting class in the country, they'd be, oh, that's an NCAA tournament team. And I don't think we're saying that with Florida State right now. And I think that's fair given I don't really know that I look at their returners and I'm like, okay, well, that's a really good player. Like I think Terrence Mann's going to have a really good year. Their point guard play concerns me a little bit. I think they're going to have to look to CJ Walker, the sophomore. He had like a solid year as a role player last year. But I think like MJ Walker and Terrence Mann are going to score a ton of points on the wing. Iki Obiagu is their other really highly touted recruit who's a big man, kind of that Florida State big man mold, really, really long, really, really high upside. But I don't necessarily know if he's like a instant like star big man. So we'll see with them. I want to say they're probably not an NCAA tournament team, kind of in that like 9 to 12 range with Clemson, but they're really just a hard team for me to put a finger on this season.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be as good offensively. And it's funny because last year, Florida State's usually known as a defensive team. Last year, they were the opposite. They scored over 80 points a game, and they gave up over 72 points a game. So them being not as good on offense, in my opinion, they'll need to get back to the way they usually play defense. A couple other guys I wanted to ask you about, Wyatt Wilkes, Raekwon Gary. These seem like some versatile guys that are coming in. Can you give me any information on those two?
I don't know a ton about them, but I do know, like, I think they both add some of that depth on the wing and the wing forward spots. I think they're going to be I think they have a chance to be really good defensively, Florida State, if they want to be, because they're going to have some really long athletes on the wings, and they're going to have a good big who can protect the rim. In terms of, so those guys, between who they've recruited and who they bring back, they're going to be long and athletic. I think they're not going to necessarily have too much trouble scoring the basketball because they're going to have guys like MJ Walker and like they won't look to those guys, those recruits you mentioned, to have to score because they'll have guys like Walker and Terrence Mann who can put the ball in the basket. But I think they're going to have to find a way to get some stops. And I think they could be a really good defensive team depending on how they line things up.
Yeah, well, I just think that, outside of Mann and Walker, I'm not too sure who's going to be that third option or offensively. So that's why I think they might struggle a little bit. But obviously those two guys can put the ball in the basket. I think Terrence Mann's going to be a breakout candidate this year. So where would you put Florida State right now in your rankings?
Let me see. I have them 12th. I have them right above Clemson. I have them 12th. But
okay.
Then again, it's that middle edge tier where I'm not, it's really kind of hard to differentiate team to team.
For sure. All right, let's move on here. Georgia Tech is the next team we're going to talk about. Obviously, the Yellow Jackets, to me, and many were the biggest surprise in college basketball last year. Many thought this team wouldn't win an ACC game, alone be in the mix for the NCAA tournament. Obviously, lots of credit to Josh Pastner. I thought, a lot of us, including myself, didn't think he did a good job at Memphis. I didn't think it was a great hire, but he did a great job. And the one thing I'm concerned about, and I want to see if you agree with me, how much of last year do you think was a fluke? Maybe a little bit of overachieving. What's your thoughts on Georgia Tech?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What your thoughts were on whether they were a fluke or not. I definitely think there was a bit of flukiness. I tweeted that out that Georgia Tech was a bit of a fluky team last year, and people got all on me because they lost like 5 games by 5 points or fewer. And I was like, well, I don't think that means you're not a fluke. Like North Carolina played their worst game of the year when they played you. Like Florida State laid an egg that one night and they blew them out. I don't necessarily think they're a fluke because I think they have 2 really high level players in Josh Okogie and Ben Lammers. But definitely there were some things last year that were like, they had such a slim margin for error, and they got a lot of things done.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a little bit of an overachievement per se. If you look at their numbers, they were pretty bad at everything except for defense. I mean, they didn't shoot the ball well. They weren't a great offensive team. They didn't do a lot of things well. So I definitely think it was a little bit of fluke. And I don't think people thought Josh Okogie would be this good.
No.
I mean, he was an absolute stud last year. So definitely, that was a big key to that too. They bring in a point guard in Jose Alvarado this year, 4-star. I've heard nothing but good things about this kid. Do you think he'll make a big impact this season?
I think they'll use him a little bit as like a 6-man guy, very shifty, can get to the rim, bring him some energy. New York City kid, he's really tough. He'll get to the rim. I think he needs to improve as a shooter a little bit, which isn't ideal considering they were, as you said, a pretty terrible 3-point shooting team. But I think he'll be a guy who brings them some energy, plays like 20 minutes a game, and contributes right away as a freshman for Georgia Tech.
For sure. Do you think they're going to have a depth issue? Because I do. Outside of Okogie, Lammers, Tadrick Jackson's back, and Alvarado, who else will step up for them, do you think, on this roster? Do you know anybody?
Well, yeah, they don't have a ton of depth. The one guy I'll point to, Brandon Alston, grad transfer from Lehigh. He has 2 years to play. Didn't really put up a ton of numbers at Lehigh. He was like a 7-5 guy in 20 minutes or so. But he's a 6'5" guard with a pretty solid wingspan. He'll hit some threes for them. He shot them at like 36-37% clip at Lehigh. So that'll be huge for them. I think he'll be like a nice rotation guard for them. He was recruited pretty highly, kind of surprisingly, given his numbers at Lehigh when he was on the grad transfer market this offseason. So I think he'll be a nice piece for them. Last year, they didn't have a ton of depth either. They got over it. So it's not something I'm like, oh, man, how will they survive without depth? But I think, yeah, Alston's a guy to look out for, maybe be a really solid rotation piece for them.
So right now, do you think they're an NCAA tournament team, in your opinion? I'd say they're right on the cusp. I think they're going to be kind of right in the mix as they were last year, a bubble team.
Yeah, that's kind of where I would be. I'd love to say that I'm confident in them to be an NCAA tournament team, and my spot that I have them in the standing says they would probably be one. I have them 8th, but I'm just not 100% confident that this team kind of replicates what they did last year. The one thing I will add from last year that I don't think people have touched on, Josh Pastner coached those guys really well. He did an outstanding job of getting them into focusing on what they could do with what they had. They were an outstanding cutting team. They were as good a cutting team at the Power 5 level in this day and age of let's run and dunk and throw alley-oops and not defend a lick and play pick and roll. They were as good a cutting team as I'd seen in a while. And so I think that's something if he can continue that culture and then bringing in some talent like Alvarado and a couple other like decent recruits, and have a ton of like super highly touted guys, but guys who can, be role players for them, I think they'll be an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, it's funny. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 15 games. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 23 games. It's just, they're just a tough team to.
Spot on.
All right, we'll move on here. Yeah, we'll move on here. Louisville is the next team we're going to talk about. Now, obviously, this is a tough team to gauge with the FBI scandal going on. What they have coming back, they still have a really good team. The court issues aside, they still can be pretty good. Obviously, back in my top 25, a few spots because I think it's going to be hard not to actions out of their mind and everything that's going on. They have a new head coach in David Padgett, so that's an adjustment as well. What do you think about Louisville?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it at the top. I love their roster. I mean, even without Brian Bowen, I still really like their roster. Experienced point guard Quentin Snyder. Big guys like Anas Mahmoud who are really good. Ray Spalding's outstanding, and a lot of people think he's going to be like a high-level ACC player this year. They're going to be really long and athletic on the wings with VJ King, and Jordan Anwar is a freshman from Vermont Academy who's going to be really solid for them. So I think they'll be real. I think they could be really good, like in a vacuum, but I'm really just not prepared to put any sort of confidence in like everything that's going on around them. We don't know whether they'll be eligible for the NCAA tournament. I have to imagine they won't be. We don't know how focused they'll be because of potential sanctions. We don't know how Padgett will be as a coach. I mean, there's just so many things at this point that are hard to predict on them. But from a roster standpoint, they're like still a top 10, 11 roster in the country, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. You know, what intrigues me is, they have 3 guys on this roster, in my opinion, in King, Spalding, Mahmoud. Those are all breakout guys. Like, I can see all those guys taking that next step and being really, really good this year. I think they're going to certainly get the opportunities. I love their size. Dang Adele, is a really rock-solid player. They have a really, really good guard in Quentin Snyder. So the pieces are there, but, with like we said, with all the distractions, it's just kind of tough to gauge, how well they'll do with all that going on. Donovan Mitchell obviously will be tough to replace as well. If he was still on this roster, you could make a case that they'd be number 1, 2, or 3 in the country, right?
Yeah, yep. I think I'd probably have them. Ooh. I mean, whenever we were saying Jalen Johnson and Donovan Mitchell are back, they were like the number 1 team in the country, and I would definitely see that as a possibility. We'll kind of see how that transpires from there, but I think. I mean, obviously, it looks like those guys made the right decision at this point. Donovan Mitchell, skyrocketed his draft stock. Jalen Johnson would have been stuck in a situation as a senior and not being able to probably play in the NCAA tournament without his coach. But yeah, that this team could have been really special. And I think we'll look back in March or April or in 2 years or 3 years and say, what could have been with this team and with all of this happening around it. It's kind of 30 for 30 stuff. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a good point. They could definitely do a 30 for 30 on all that's going on right now. Would you put them still maybe in the top 4 in the conference heading into the season?
Yeah. So right now I have them 4th just because I have no idea where to put them. And that seemed as good as any. I think they'd still probably, talent-wise, as we said, probably a top 10 team. I figured I'd drop them basically 10 spots to around 20, which would put them in that 3 to 6 range of the conference. I mean, I'd love to know your thoughts. Where do you see them?
I have them at I would probably put them in the maybe 14 to 6, 17 range. So a little bit higher than you. I originally had them at 8, and I still think they're a really, really good team. So I moved them back, I think, to 14. So I thought that was a good spot for them. They're still really, really good. We'll see what happens. Hopefully it works out. David Padgett gets a big opportunity. So let's move on here. Miami is the next team we're going to talk about. Now, Miami is a team I'm really excited about. You can make a case on paper that this is one of the most talented rosters you'll see in college basketball. Jim Larinaga has done such an outstanding job recruiting. And it's funny because you never hear him get mentioned when talking about the best recruits in the nation. I think for the 3rd year in the row, he brings in a 5-star recruit in Lonnie Walker, who actually got practice again today, which is good news for them. He's a super talented guard out of Pennsylvania. Things break right. They can find themselves, if they get some contributions in the front court, I think they're an ACC title contender. Do you agree?
So I was actually looking at them a little more today, and I still think they could contend for a title, but I'm not quite as sold as you are. And the one thing I'm concerned about is point guard play, other than front court. Jaquan Newton is really good, but he's not necessarily a great point guard. He basically turned it over as much as he had assists. His assist-to-turnover ratio was pretty much 1-to-1. Bruce Brown is not like a high assist-to-turnover guy. So the one thing and neither is Walker. So the one thing I'm looking at maybe that could increase their upside to me would be 4-star freshman point guard Chris Likes, 5'8" kid, really small but really fun to watch from the DMV. I think he's the type of kid who, if he could come in and be a true point guard, and they could transition Newton into maybe like a 6-man, like high scoring role, that could be really interesting. Because I think they have the pieces in the front court. It's just a matter of, do they pan out? Like DeJuan Huell has to have a good year. But I'm not 100% sold that a team with a point guard who's going to turn it over as much as he has assists, his assist to turnover ratio is 1-to-1. I'm not sold that that's like a top 10 type team.
No, that's a very good point. And you mentioned DeJuan Huell. I think he's a major X factor for them. He's a former 5-star recruit, didn't really pan out last year. If he can make a bigger impact, that's going to be big for Miami. Also, I'm concerned defensively because, they lose Kamari Murphy and Devon Reed, and those two were their, big-time defensive guys last year. So we'll see if they can match how good they were last year on defense. I know it's not a good option, relying on a freshman point guard, but he might have to make a big impact. Do you think he can, Likes?
Yeah, I like Chris Likes. I remember watching a highlight tape of him when he was like a junior or like a sophomore, and I was like, wow, why is this kid getting so many offers? I mean, he's really freaking good, but he's 5'8". And then I watched more, and I was like, okay, this kid is like outstanding. Like he definitely reminds me a bit of Justin Robinson from Monmouth. Just like super small, but hit shots, super competitive, super tough. I think he could be that kind of X factor piece for them, and run the show a little bit. I would be a little concerned with their height defensively, especially if they put in like Newton with him in the backcourt. Then all of a sudden you're going like 5'8", 6'1", 6'5", and maybe even going 4 guards and going 2 6'5" kids in like Brown and Walker. And so then you start to sacrifice a lot defensively and on the glass. So they have a lot of options. I'll be interested to see how Jim Larrañaga kind of lays them all out. But yeah, I think the upside is there to be like a top 8 or 10 team in the country. But I'm not ready to be like, oh yeah, like let's hop on the bandwagon. That's kind of where I am with a lot of these teams. Is I feel like they're one piece or one question to be answered away.
That's certainly fair. Before we move on, can you give us a little background on Lonnie Walker and what he does?
5-star kid from Pennsylvania, as you mentioned. 6'5" guard. He can really score the ball. I'm super excited to watch him and Bruce Brown and see how they kind of intermingle offensively. Coming off that knee injury, I'm a little nervous. Guy who relies on his athleticism and his first step. But I'm super excited to see that combo. Jim Larrañaga is really crafty. Like he set up a home game in Reading, PA, which is the hometown of Lonnie Walker, versus LaSalle, a neutral site game, basically as a thank you present for coming to Miami. Like the dude is a genius. And this was probably in the works before he landed Walker as part of like a package deal. Like we land Walker, then we'll set up this game. We'll play LaSalle and Reading, PA. Like this is the genius stuff from Jim Larrañaga. This is how you recruit.
That's why I mentioned before we got started talking that he's one of the best recruiters in the country. He's really brought a lot of talent down there, and he's done a really good job. So that's actually a pretty cool story and very, very smart from Jim Larrañaga. So we'll see how Miami does this year. Should definitely be exciting regardless of what happens. So
they're going to be super fun to watch.
Oh, definitely for sure. NC State up next tonight. Pretty interesting team, if you ask me. We know they have a new coach in Kevin Keats, which I thought was a great hire. I didn't think Mark Godfrey deserved the axe. Just my personal opinion, but getting a guy like Keats, he comes in, takes over. He makes an impact right out of the gate. Snags Devon Daniels from Utah, CJ Bryce from UNC Wilmington. Obviously, these guys aren't eligible this year, but still for the future. Al Freeman, grad transfer from Baylor. So he's really bringing talent into the program. LeVar Betts is another guy I should mention. I kind of seen the Wolfpack all over the place in early power rankings. I've seen them 9th, 13th, 12th, all over the place. What's your thoughts on this NC State roster?
So, yeah, I don't think the cupboard is as bare as some have made it out to be. I do have them 9th. I do disagree. I think it was time for Mark Gottfried to go, not because he's a bad coach, but they just needed new energy and new blood, and that happens in a college basketball program. But I do really like this team. Point guard play. I think they have a pair of guys who can handle that spot. And Markel Johnson, who I really liked last year in kind of like a limited role, and then LeVar Batts, who's a freshman they grabbed late. They've got some wing depth that they've built up through the transfer market with Al Freeman and Sam Hunt from NCANT. Yeah, NCANT. And then Torin Dorn's back as well. Malik Abu's on his like 19th year of college. He's been there. He's been there forever, but he's still really good.
Yeah.
I think they have pieces to be like fringe NCAA tournament team. I really love Kevin Keats. He's a really good coach. He brings so much energy. He brings that system. I mean, he showed up at UNC Wilmington. He won 3 straight regular season titles. Like, who does that?
Kevin Keats.
He can really coach. And so I think they'll be competitive. I think they'll win a lot of games. And I wouldn't rule them out being an NCAA tournament team at all.
Right, for sure. They do have to get better on defense. They were horrendous last year. They were like 322nd in the country. So that's obviously a major factor. They got to improve on that. And then Omer, I think it's Omer Yurtseven. Is that how you say it?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many names in college basketball now that I just can't even pronounce. It's ridiculous. He seems like a guy that could, take that next step this year. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, this was a guy people were talking about as a potential like NBA lottery pick when he was in like October, when he had to be like ineligible for 10 games or whatever, for reasons I'm forgetting off the top of my head. He's, I think, 7 foot tall. He's super skilled, kind of like a unicorn type that they talk about in the NBA now, like a Porzingis. Like, that's kind of his skill set. I'm not saying he's Porzingis, but so I think he's a guy who could, he could be a breakout star for them. And I think he's if he takes that step that people thought he was going to be last year, then they're probably an NCAA tournament team in my mind. Like, if he's like who I think people thought he was going to be last year, they're an NCAA tournament team.
Yeah, for sure. His role is probably going to really expand this year. I mean, he only played like 18 minutes a game last year, so I definitely could see him doubling his stats from last year. He averaged 6 and 4. So I definitely could see those numbers rising, obviously. So real quick, where would you put them right now before we move on in your rankings?
I have them 9th, so right behind Georgia Tech, right ahead of Syracuse. And I think that's pretty much where I have to put them until I see them play. They're just they're going to be fun. Like, I could see them play a lot of Abu at the 5, because he kind of reminds me of Devontae Kaycock, who was so good for UNC Wilmington the last 2 years, where he can just rim run and get rebounds and hit the glass really hard on the offensive end and make some plays for them, dunk a lot. So I'll be interested to see how they run their whole system. But they do have pieces, and I think that's the one thing we both kind of touched on that people don't really necessarily realize.
Yeah, for sure. And Leonard Freeman, he's on his 12th year of college, so maybe he can actually give them somewhat of an impact, but he just can't stay healthy. But if he can, that's a bonus, because he's not that bad of a player, actually. So NC State, definitely a team that we need to keep our eye on for sure. Okay, so up next, national champs, North Carolina. Coming off a national title, as we know. Redemption, because they lost the year before at the buzzer at Villanova, so I'm sure that they were happy about that. Looking at this year's roster, significant pieces, especially in the front court, Meeks, Hicks, Bradley. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. Obviously they were one of the best rebounding teams in the country last year. Barry, Theo Pinson are back. Luke May also looks like a guy that could be a breakout candidate. Woods a lot. He's an interesting player. The question I have for you, though, is this still a national title team in your opinion? What do you think about the Tar Heels?
I wouldn't call them a first-tier national title contender this year. Like, I wouldn't necessarily rule out a repeat, but I just don't necessarily see it. They won last year because they absolutely crushed teams on the glass, and then they had 2 guys in Joel Berry and Justin Jackson who could get you a bucket when you need it, especially Justin Jackson. And so they lose Justin Jackson, and they lose pretty much the entire front court in terms of especially the really good rebounders in Bradley, Hicks, and Kennedy Meeks. So I think you're going to see just a huge shift in how they play this year. I think they're going to have to go 4 guards a lot. They're going to have to go like Theo Pinson and Cam Johnson playing on and those 2 like small forward, power forward spots in a 4-guard look. They're going to be fun to watch. They're going to space the floor really well. They've got some athletes. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that I would say like they're a national title contender. They're more like a 15 to like a 12 to 18 team in the top 25, in my opinion.
Okay, couple things I wanted to ask you about regarding the roster. Theo Pinson, do you think they're going to have to look to him for some more offense this season?
I think so. I don't think they'll necessarily have to, but I think they will. I think he's ready to take that next step in terms of his development, but we'll see if he actually has. I don't think it is necessary, as some people think, for him to go out and score 10, 11 points a game for them, because they have a guy in Cameron Johnson who's going to hit some threes for them and kind of do a little bit of everything. They'll have, I think, Kenny Williams could be a nice little piece for them on the wing. Seventh Woods, you mentioned. The other guy, Jalik Felton, Raymond Felton's son, I believe. Some way related to Raymond Felton. Like a 5-star kid, super talented. I could see him in like a 6-man scoring role. I know Roy Williams hasn't been, bringing a freshman, have him be a star right away, the way some guys have. But I think Felton's a guy who could score a little bit for them. So I think they do have a lot of options in the backcourt that allow Pinson to do a lot of his just like glue guy stuff that he's been doing throughout his career. But I do expect him to be looked to score a little more this year just on his development.
Okay, and where do you have them in your power rankings preseason?
I have them 3rd, so right behind number 1 Duke and number 2 Miami, and then I think I had them like 16 in my top 25. I have to go back and look at that, but somewhere in that range.
I put them at 11th in my top 25, kind of just out of respect too that
right.
Former national champs. They do bring back a solid group. I mean, Berry, Pinson, Cam Johnson's obviously really good transfer, and Luke May could be maybe the difference maker for them. If he can be an impact guy, but definitely concerned about the front court. So let's move on here. Notre Dame is the next team we're going to talk about. Obviously, another successful year for Notre Dame. 26 wins. Mike Brey continues to churn out excellent teams. Attention deserved, obviously. We've talked about that a lot. He's also a very good recruiter. He's got the total package, in my opinion. Somewhat of an adjustment. I feel, they lose Steve Astoria and BJ Beacham, 2 4-year guys that were a big part of their success the last few years. Bonzie Colson's back, All-American National Player of the Year type kid. Saw him on the scene last year. I've known Colson for a long time. He's from my area, so I kind of followed his recruitment and whatnot. I never thought at all he'd be this type of player, this good. Also, Matt Farrell, maybe the most improved player in the country last year. What's your thoughts on Notre Dame?
Well, like you said, you have to love that duo of Matt Farrell and Bonzie Colson. I mean, those are 2 guys I'd put them against pretty much any pairing in the country. Excuse me. The question I just have is who's after that? I know they bring in DJ Harvey, a kid from the DMV who's 6'6", 220, physical, can play multiple positions. I think he'll be a nice, maybe like a 3rd scorer option potentially for them. Temple Gibbs is going to be a guy who people look to break out. Elijah Burns, who's actually a kid from my area on Notre Dame. I mentioned him to you via Twitter the other day. I think he could take a step up. John Rothstein, our beloved college basketball friend, sung his praises. And so I think, I just don't want to bet against Mike Brey. Like, I don't love the roster behind Bonzie Colson and Matt Farrell, and to a certain degree DJ Harvey, but am I really in a position to say that a Mike Brey team isn't good? And I'm not. So I think they're still probably a fringe top 25 team, still an NCAA tournament team, still a team that no one's going to want to play because they have one of the best players in the country in Bonzie Colson.
Yeah, I agree. I have them right outside my top 25. I pretty much have the same concerns you do. I don't think they have a lot of depth, which concerns me. Also, their size up front, really no impact guys in that front court other than Colson. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Talk about DJ Harvey a little bit. Can you give us a little background on Harvey?
Yeah, so 4-star kid I think he was ranked like 50 or 60th overall in the recruiting rankings. As I said, he's 6'6". He can kind of do a little bit of everything. He can play from like the 2 to even like a small ball 4. Gonna improve as a shooter as he goes on, but he's physical. He's a game ready body. I think he'll slash for them a little bit. I think Mike Bray is going to do a really good job with him kind of finding his role in terms of won't ask him to score a ton, but we'll free him up to do some scoring without having to, be a full starter 30-minute a game guy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I'd probably put them in the top 6 in the ACC. Is that fair? Do you think?
Yeah. I think I'd have them if we're going to consider Louisville still top 4, if we're going to say that they're going to be a top 4 team, which is kind of hard to say, I'd say I'd have them in that same 5 to 7 group as Virginia Tech, and Notre Dame. So we'll see. Sure. I have my Virginia rant coming, so look forward to that. Stay tuned.
Oh God. Okay, so the next breakdown tonight is Pittsburgh. So this should be pretty quick. There's not much to talk about. So all right. So first of all, I'm a bit confused with the Kevin Stallings hire. I think a lot of people are. To me, he just doesn't fit their program. I'm not sure what it is. It's kind of like a gut feeling. He's not a bad coach per se, but I just don't know if he fits there. This is going to be a rough season. I'm sure you agree. It's pretty much a team full of newcomers. I mean, Ryan Luther is really the only guy last year that played any minutes at all. Averaged like 6 points and 4 rebounds. What is your take on this team? How bad do you think they'll be? Because they're going to be bad.
I mean, it's really just hard to say how bad they'll be because I don't know who a lot of their players are. Like, they have 11 newcomers, and 8 of them are freshmen. 2 are JUCO transfers, neither were super highly touted, and one's a grad transfer from Lafayette College who posted 10 points a game. And then there's Ellison from St. John's just to sit out this year. He's actually a really good player, but he won't be there. I just don't know. I think Marcus Carr could be pretty solid for them, and Parker Stewart, former Ole Miss commit. I think both of them will be kind of have to hold their own in the backcourt. But it's not like these newcomers are super highly regarded. We're talking about Samson George, a former Iona signee. We're talking about Kenneth, I forget his name. He's a JUCO transfer who's a sophomore who scored 4 points a game in junior college, but had a nice summer and got a bunch of mid-major looks. We aren't talking about surefire ACC players. And so I really do think it's going to be a rough year. I mean, sure, they could pull out some things, and some of these freshmen could turn into high-level ACC players eventually, and they're in great shape. But I'm concerned for the future of this Pitt program because this incoming group could hurt them more than they help them.
Right. I was looking over their newcomers, this week doing, doing breakdowns for this podcast. And, Marcus Carr obviously looks like a guy that could be a solid player. Samson George, you mentioned, for Iona commit. I looked at him a little bit. Jared Wilson Frame is a JUCO guy they got. But other than that, I mean, it's just such an unknown. I have no problem putting them in the bottom spot in the ACC.
Neither do I.
Is that where you would put them?
Yeah, I'd have.
I mean, what is your? Before we move on, I did want to ask you this. Why do you think? What was the reason they hired Kevin Stallings? What's your thoughts on that?
I really don't know. When Jamie Dixon went by the wayside, I think obviously he's a really good coach, as we've seen with what he's done at TCU. It was probably for the best. It was just everything wasn't really the program wasn't running smooth. But then you hire a guy who's just a good coach, but he's older guy. He's not going to energize anyone. When you're making a change like that, you want a Kevin Heat style coach. You want a guy who's high energy, who's won a lot at a lower level, who's young, maybe a high major assistant who's done a really good job. You don't want to bring in a middle-aged Kevin Stallings who he's not going to bring anything to your program in terms of getting that next level of excitement and building a program. He's not a program builder. I wouldn't call Kevin Stallings. He's not a Lon Kruger or something like that. I would have understood a Lon Kruger. But I mean, I think Kevin Stallings is on the hot seat more than people think.
Mhm.
I know his contract is bad, and I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, they can't afford it." But I'll tell you why I think he's on the hot seat. He went out and he filled every single scholarship he had in like May. He went out late and filled every scholarship with guys who were, a lot of them are shots in the dark. If he thought he had confidence that he was going to have many years to do this thing right and rebuild it, he would have said, "These scholarships are gold. I'm not wasting a scholarship potentially and then having to force kids out or make moves somewhere else." He would have said, "Okay, I'll hold them. I'll go get 4 stars in 2018 and we'll get it back on track. We'll just take this as a reset year." I think he feels a little internal pressure to get the job done.
That's an excellent point, Kevin, actually. And we actually talked about Pitt way longer than I thought. Because, oh my God,
their roster's bad. It's really bad.
It's bad. It really is. I feel like both of us know college basketball pretty well. I look at this roster and I don't know anybody. I really don't. I mean, I know a few, Ryan Luther, I knew of, Carr, but that's it. I mean, it's just such an unknown. So I think they're going to struggle. So let's move on to Syracuse. Now, Syracuse is coming off a pretty underwhelming season, missed out on the NCAA tournament. I thought they underachieved. I thought the roster had more than enough talent, was pretty disappointing. Road wins, obviously, they just couldn't win on the road. This season, to me, looks like it might be a struggle, especially now that Torian Thompson transferred. He's off to Seton Hall. So you pretty much have Tyus Battle, Frank Howard, Geno Thorpe transfer from South Florida, probably is going to make an impact. But what do you think about this Syracuse team?
I think they're a little more intriguing than some people are pegging them. Like, on paper, the roster isn't super talented, but I think they have some interesting pieces to be a really good defensive team in the zone. Tyus Battle's a long wing. Matthew Moyer, who a lot of people are talking about, a redshirt freshman, is a long wing. They have 2 more wings who are coming in and who can play like the 2 through 4 spots, and Marek Dolazaj from Slovakia, and O'Shea Brissett, who's a 4-star kid who's long at 6'8". Especially if they go with Frank Howard at the point, he's long and could defend for them. And then Pascal Chukwu and Baramas Dibi will probably be in holding down the post. They have the potential to be a really good defensive team. And Tyus Battle is going to score enough. They'll have Geno Thorpe, I think, in probably like a 6-man role where he can give them a couple of buckets. If some of those younger guys can put the ball in the basket, I think they have the potential to be pretty interesting just because they'll be really good defensively.
Okay. What do you think about Matt Moyer, medical redshirt? Do you think he can make any of an impact this season?
Yeah. I like Matt Moyer, 6'8" kid. He's strong. Missed last year, as you mentioned. But I think he's a guy who plays like the 2 through the 4, hit a couple threes and to keep defenses honest. He should be game ready. Played prep school basketball, one of the top prep programs in the country, up in the Northeast. So I think Matt Moyer will be a guy who they can look to as maybe like an 8-point per game, 4-rebound guy, and as a starter, as a rotation player. I think that'd be a reasonable expectation.
I wanted to ask you about Jim Boeheim. Obviously, he gets a contract extension. Do you think he's fully committed? Is that a silly question, or because he was kind of thinking about retiring now he's back? What's your thoughts on Jim?
I think Jim Boeheim is fully committed. I think the last couple of years, the reason for their struggles is that A, he maybe hasn't been fully committed, and B, this whole thing of is he leaving soon, is he not leaving soon, has left just a lot hanging over the program's head. And so they've missed on some recruits. I know people keep wanting to circle back to, oh, well, Tyler Ennis left early and it screwed them over. It's like, you had 3 years to find a point guard. Don't blame Tyler Ennis. But I think now if you look at their 2018 recruiting class that's developing, they have Darius Basley, who's like a top 15 kid in the country. They have Jalen Carey, who's a really good point guard. So I think he's starting to recruit better now that he's saying, I'm going to be here for the long term, and he can show that to recruits. So I think his kind of in and out couple years has hurt him on the recruiting trail, that's for sure. But I think he's starting to regain that momentum. So this year may be a bit of a rebuild, but like the future, I think, looks pretty bright.
Okay, and right now, where would you put them in the ACC rankings?
I have them 10th now, so I would say like right now I'm leaning towards them not being an NCAA tournament team, but I wouldn't rule it out by any means. I don't think they're as far away as some people think they might be. I mean, okay. What do you think? Their team, like some people said, oh, that's the least talented roster other than Pittsburgh, and I was like, you haven't read Boston College's.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't think they're an NCAA tournament team. I would probably maybe put them in that 17 to 19 win range. So I think they might get close, maybe be in the mix, a bubble team, but I just don't think they have enough to get over the hump and get into the NCAA tournament. So we'll see, though. Jim Boeheim is obviously one of the best coaches in the nation, so he can obviously, coach them up and get them into the tournament mix. So, all right, here we are, Virginia. Kevin's Binky team. It's time to talk about the Hoos. So the Hoos are coming off a solid season for their standards, obviously 23 wins. It'll be somewhat of adjustment. They lose Malcolm Brogdon last year. Now they lose London Parantes, two guys that were so important to that program's success the last few years. The cupboard isn't bare, though. Kyle Guy, Ty Jerome, two guys back that, many think will take that next step this season. They could struggle. I'm not as high as you are on this team. Last season we know they were god-awful offensively. Averaged like 66 points a game. Defense, as usual, was really good. Tony Bennett, he always is one of the best. He's made UVA into one of the better defensive teams year in and year out. So what makes you think this team is pretty good?
So I think they have the most potential offensively in terms of a diverse offensive team that Tony Bennett's had. Like, sure, he had Klay Thompson at Washington State, and he was really, really good. And sure, he had like Malcolm Brogdon, and he was really good. But I think they have some guys who are weapons. You mentioned Guy and Jerome. Those are really good offensive players in the ACC potentially. Then you bring in Nigel Johnson, who's a grad transfer from Rutgers, who was like an 11-point-a-game guy. He'll give them some minutes off the bench probably. Then you add DeAndre Hunter, who's a really long, athletic 6'7" wing player from the Philly area, I believe, who redshirted last year because he needed to put on weight. But he's going to be he's a really talented player. And I also just feel like they have those offensive weapons, but they also have a decent front court. Isaiah Wilkins is really solid. Jack Salt's a guy I don't think people are talking about. And then a breakout guy, a sophomore, Mamadi Diakite. I've heard people mention him as like an NBA level guy at 6'10", really long, needs to still put on some weight. But Mamadi Diakite is a guy who I think could be like an interesting X factor for them. I just feel like their floor is really low. Like their floor to me is like 7th or 8th in the ACC just because their defense will win them enough games. And then from there, it's like, is their offense going to be good? And I think it could be. Like, if you told me Virginia's coming in 2nd this year, I wouldn't be stunned. You're going to laugh at me. I wouldn't be stunned. I really wouldn't be stunned.
Hey, that's fine. That's your opinion. Devon Hall and Isaiah Wilkins, I like those players. I do. But, they're role players. I don't think you're going to get much more than you've got out of them the last few years. And I just think this season relies heavily on Guy and Jerome. Like if both those guys don't really take that next step, like we think they can, it's going to be a tough season again. I mean, does it come down? Is it that simple, really?
Yeah, no, I think it really is that simple. You're pretty much right. Like they have offensive weapons, but if they don't play well, they're basically the same team as they were a season ago, except they don't have London Parantes.
That's a big hit.
I think you're right that Hall and Wilkins, they are just role players. They're really great role players. They're really good role players for the ACC, but they're not going to like blossom into superstars. They're reliant on Jerome being good, Guy being good, Johnson giving them some scoring touch, Hunter giving them some minutes. I've heard so many good things about DeAndre Hunter. Like people have told me like lottery pick potential. 6'7", wow. 2-guard. Like not saying he's going to wind up there, but one of those guys where if he like meets all of his potential, then he could be a lottery pick or like a first-round pick in the NBA draft at some point.
Okay, and before we move on, where do you have Virginia in your rankings?
So I have them 6th because I think it's the right spot to put them in a preseason poll. And I think it's probably the right spot to say that's where they're going to be this season. But I definitely could, like, if you told me they're better than Notre Dame, I'd be like, okay. You told me they're better than Louisville, okay. If they're better than North Carolina, wouldn't surprise me. Better than Miami, maybe. Like, I wouldn't be that surprised.
Okay, well, I'm definitely going to hold this, hold you to it, Kevin. So when they come in,
it's on video now. It's on video.
When they come in 9th, you're going to get trolled pretty hard. So
go for it. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so Virginia Tech's up next. Buzz Williams, as usual, doing a great job turning a program around. He did it at Marquette. He's doing it at Virginia Tech. In just his 3rd year, they made the NCAA tournament. Last year, 2 years ago, they came even really close to making the tournament. So, this year's team looks to be pretty good. I mean, one of the better backcourts you'll find in college basketball, really deep, really talented. Up front might be an issue. Kerry Blackshear, he's back from missing last year with an injury. Apparently, Kadeem Sy might not transfer now. Is that the story?
Yeah. So if I read the report correctly a few days ago, maybe a week, that he is coming back to Virginia Tech. I think so. I'm working on the assumption he'll be there as the backup center to Kerry Blackshear.
Okay. Well, that's good news. Chris Clark basically might be the X factor, for this team. If he can get back healthy from ACL injury, they can be really, really good. I mean, I'm talking top 5 ACC good, in my opinion. Maybe even a second weekend, NCAA tournament team. What do you think about this roster? Are you as high on the Hokies as I am?
I love their guards, as you mentioned. And I think like Kerry Blackshear, I think could be like a double-double guy in many cases, like a 10-7 type player for them. Mm-hmm. So I think if everything breaks right, then yeah, but they could be like a top 5 team and a top 5 ACC team. One thing I'm a little worried about, they seem a little stake bitten with injuries. Like last year, Blackshear was down. This year, Travis Outlaw's down. Like they just feel like this doesn't feel right. It doesn't. Chris Clark's dealt with injuries. They're just like pretty much you name a guy in their roster and he's fought an injury over the last year and a half. And I just I wonder like what's the next domino to fall. Is Chris Clark ever going to be healthy? Because when he is, he's really outstanding. So, I mean, we'll see. I really like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the freshman, really long wing, does a lot of good things from the Canadian kid. And so, they're talented. I think they're definitely an NCAA tournament team, but I'd probably have them 7th right now in the ACC.
Okay, I think that's a fair spot. I was going to say maybe between 5 and 7. Their backcourt is just so talented and so deep. I mean, they're going to play 4-guard lineups a lot. Am I right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And that's kind of why I'm sad that Outlaw went out. And I think you can do this also with Clark. But Outlaw would have been a really fun guy to play the 4 in those lineups. Same thing with Clark. But I think that's the kind of thing that's that's the kind of thing that worries me is if Clark's not healthy, who's playing the 4? Or if now that Kadeem Sy's back, my fear is a little bit tempered. But what happens when Kerry Blackshear leaves the game?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, it basically comes down to health. If Chris Clark is healthy and they can get, some of these guys rolling, really, really good team, and definitely top 5 in the ACC, in my opinion. So Virginia Tech should be pretty good. Buzz Williams, obviously one of the better coaches you'll find in college basketball. The final team we're going to talk about tonight, Wake Forest. Big step forward last year, making the NCAA tournament. They go from 11 wins 2 years ago to 19 this past year. Danny Manning has his program definitely on the right track. He's doing a really, really good job recruiting. This year they lose John Collins, who was just an absolute beast last season. He averaged 19 and 9. Now, even with him gone, I felt okay about this team. Because pretty much everyone else returning, and then Dinos Mitaglu, he goes pro overseas, so that really put a dent in their front court. A lot of pressure on Doral Moore now. If Wake Forest wants to get back to the NCAA tournament, what's your thoughts on this team?
I mean, I'd start by saying Bryant Crawford's awesome. 16, he's a 16-6 guy. I mean, he's probably an all ACC type player. I will say I'm not quite as comfortable picking Wake Forest to be good this year as a lot of people are, just because John Collins was really good, like 20 and 10 on high efficiency good. Like make everybody else around you good, better because he's not because he's drawing all the attention good. And that's gone, and there's nothing even close. Like Doral Moore, we're counting on their front court just to be serviceable. If we're saying they're an NCAA team, we're like, okay, Doral Moore and Olivier Sarr, the freshman, and Terrence Thompson from the transfer from Marshall hold down the front court to serviceability. But it goes then from a strength, like a massive strength of having John Collins and Middleglue, to now it's just serviceable. And so now we're counting on Bryant Crawford to be, 20 and 7? If they're an NCAA tournament team. I don't know how much more you could ask of Bryant Crawford, and that's kind of my hesitation with Wake this year.
No, I agree with you. Excellent backcourt. Keyshawn Woods, really good player. Mitchell Wilbekin is a really good role player for them. But up front, I would feel better if Middleglue didn't go pro. I would feel a little bit better, but I just think, losing John Collins and now him to, get enough production up front. Doral Moore, he showed some flashes 2 years ago, and then last year he kind of took a step back and was, pretty much non-existent. So absolutely horrible defensive team. I still don't understand how they won 19 games last year. Like you said, he was so good, but they're really bad defensively. So I would probably put them, maybe in that 10 to 12 range in the ACC. Do you agree?
Yeah, I have them 11th. Honestly, though, if they went under 500 for the year, I wouldn't be stunned. If they wound up being 5 and 13 or 6 and 12 in the ACC, I wouldn't be like, oh wow, this is a complete shocker to me. They're John Collins was one of the probably top 10 college players in the nation last year, I'd argue.
Yeah, for sure.
He was so freaking good.
Oh, absolutely. He was unstoppable at times. He was a big reason why they made the NCAA tournament, obviously. Let me ask you real quick. Talk about Danny Manning a little bit. Is he kind of flying under the radar as doing a good job building this program?
I think he is to a certain degree, yeah. Obviously this year I'm not 100% sold on him, but the recruiting class they've got coming in next year is freaking out. It's really, really good. They have some really good pieces coming in. I think they have Isaiah Musius, who's 4 or 5 star wing. They have multiple really talented wings coming in. I don't have the names off the top of my head, but he's recruiting really well for 2018. Brian Crawford was a sophomore last year, and I don't necessarily think of him as an NBA guy. So you could be thinking about the 2018-19 season having Bryant Crawford as an ACC Player of the Year candidate next to some really good freshmen. And it wouldn't I wouldn't be stunned if they're a top 25 team eventually. I think he's doing a good job. I think just when you lose when you lose your entire front court, which is the strength of the team, to expect an NCAA tournament run this year is kind of hard to say.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I think he's doing a good job, but it's going to be a little bit too much for them to get back to the tournament this year. All right, that's it for tonight, guys, for the team-by-team breakdowns. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to have a little bit of fun right now. We're going to have our picks for this year's ACC. So we'll start, Kevin, tonight with the player of the year. Who's your player of the year in the ACC this season?
I have it as Bonzie Colson. I know some people will be we'll say it's Grayson Allen. I'd understand that, or Joel Berry, and I'd understand that. But to me, Bonzie Colson, 17 and 10 last year, 6'5", but he's super fun because he's super long, so he can play down low. I don't think you can sit there and consistently say, okay, that player is significantly better than Bonzie Colson or more important to their team, which is something I weigh heavily. If you took Grayson Allen off Duke, I'd probably dropped him to a top 10, top to 10 to 15 instead of top 5. I wouldn't drop him that much because they have guards who can score. If you took Bonzie Colson off Notre Dame, I don't know if they're a 500 team in the ACC.
That's a great point. And I think he could legitimately put up, 20 and 10 this year. And I think if Notre Dame, is an NCAA tournament team and they're in the top 5, 6 in the ACC, he's the guy that'll win the award. He's just so valuable to that team. They don't have the depth and the talent that a Duke has or something like that. So obviously Bonzie Colson is my pick as well. Who do you have for coach of the year?
Coach of the year? Let's go Tony Bennett, because Virginia's coming in second and stunning the world.
I should have saw that coming.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's Tony Bennett. I wouldn't be surprised. I hadn't really given a ton of thought to it. Like if Duke wins and is really comfortable in winning, it'll go to Coach K. I wouldn't necessarily rule out if Kevin Keats gets them to like 7th or something like that. If he got them to like 7th in the ACC, maybe he gets the nod. But yeah, I think my bet will be Tony Bennett.
That's fine. That's fine. That's not a bad pick. My dark horse, I agree with you, would be Kevin Keats if somehow he can get them to 18, 20 wins and sneak them into the NCAA tournament. I'm going to go with Buzz Williams. I think Buzz Williams, if they can get healthy, this is a legitimate top, like I said, when we talk about him, top 4 or 5 team in the ACC. So if he can creep up into that top 4 or 5, I think Virginia Tech and Buzz Williams could win the award. So I'm going to go with Buzz. Who is your this might be a pretty easy one, but who's your newcomer of the year in the conference?
Yeah, I think you have to go with Marvin Bagley, just because he's really good, and he's going to score probably. I think he'll be like a 13-7 guy, and that's not to say there aren't other really good newcomers who could put up big numbers, but like Marvin Bagley's the best newcomer in the conference. Whether he puts up the best numbers is a question, but he's really, really good.
Absolutely. He's a transcendent talent type guy. So I would go with Marvin Bagley as well. Okay. So right now on, I think it's October 17th today. Who is your ACC champ?
I have Duke. I don't, as we mentioned, I have my trepidations, but I mean, I just don't look at a team and I say, oh, well, that team's a lot better than Duke, or that team's going to be better than Duke, other than Virginia, of course. Virginia for ACC champions.
Oh man. Okay, yeah, I'm going with Duke as well. It's just hard to go against the talent they have on that roster this year. We might think differently in a few weeks, or a few weeks into the season, but right now it's got to be Duke. So I'm going to go with the Blue Devils as well. So that wraps up the podcast tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Kevin, thanks a lot for joining. Again, Kevin Sweeney runs cbbcentral.com. Definitely check it out. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good mid-major stuff as well. Also at CBB Central. Kevin, you have anything else to plug tonight? Any previews or anything like that?
Nope. Just keep checking out my conference previews over at my site, cbbcentral.com. We'll have tons of good stuff going up through the end of the month. And then can't wait to get going with the season. Appreciate having me on, Tony.
All right, guys. We'll be back later in the week with another preview. I will announce it tomorrow, which conference and which guests will be joining me. So look out for that, probably on Thursday or Friday. Thanks for joining. Tony Patelis, College Hoop News Podcast. We'll talk to you later.